There's a man sitting in the Cleveland Browns facility right now who should be the talk of the entire NFL. A quarterback who came out of college with the kind of pedigree that makes scouts lose sleep. A player who checks every box on paper, and a competitor who by every measurable standard has done exactly what was asked of him. And yet, if you've been following the headlines, you wouldn't even know he exists. His name is Dillon Gabriel. And somehow, in one of the most chaotic, unpredictable quarterback situations in the history of professional football, he has been made completely invisible. Not because he failed, not because he crumbled under pressure, but because the machine around him has decided that his story simply isn't convenient enough to tell. The world is currently obsessed with two names in Cleveland. One is a man carrying the weight of a $230 million contract and a career that has been plagued with controversy, injury, and relentless public scrutiny. The other is a rookie with a famous last name, an electric playing style, and enough media magnetism to light up an entire city. And caught directly in the crossfire of that collision, buried so deep beneath the noise that most fans have stopped asking about him entirely, is Dillon Gabriel. A man who has been reportedly doing everything right inside that facility, the preparation, the reps, the attitude, the football IQ, and yet finds every door of opportunity locked from the inside. But here's what nobody is telling you. Just when it looked like Gabriel's story was going to end before it ever truly began, something unexpected has started happening. A lifeline, quiet and almost invisible itself, has begun to emerge from the most unlikely corner of this entire situation. And the moment it fully surfaces, it is going to send shockwaves through the entire organization that nobody in Cleveland is prepared for. The atmosphere inside the Browns training facility right now is not what you'd call a standard NFL training camp. It is something closer to a high-stakes psychological war zone where every single day feels like it could be someone's last. Coaches are watching every throw with the intensity of men who know their own jobs are on the line. Players are studying each other's mistakes like opposing attorneys, and the media, predictably, has turned the whole circus into a two-man story that leaves almost no room for anyone else. The conversation, as far as the national sports world is concerned, begins and ends with Deshaun Watson versus Shedeur Sanders. It's framed as the ultimate generational clash, the battered veteran trying to reclaim his throne versus the shiny new phenomenon who arrived with the weight of expectations most rookies never survive. It's compelling television, it's great content, and it has effectively erased Dillon Gabriel from the public consciousness as thoroughly as if someone had walked into the record room and shredded every file with his name on it. Inside that facility, the first-team reps are being distributed like rare currency, handed only to the men the coaching staff has already decided matter. And by every credible account coming out of Cleveland, Gabriel isn't even in that conversation. He isn't fighting for first-team snaps. He isn't being evaluated in the same breath as the other two. He is being managed, handled, and quietly sidelined in a way that some insiders are already calling a calculated burial. The idea, according to those close to the situation, is to force the veteran Watson to prove his worth under real pressure, while simultaneously grooming the rookie Sanders for a future that the front office may have already decided is inevitable. It sounds almost logical when you frame it that way, but it leaves one enormous, deeply uncomfortable question sitting in the middle of the room. Is this genuinely an open competition based on football merit, or has the ending already been written, decided in some backroom meeting months before a single training camp rep was ever taken, and the whole competition narrative is nothing more than theater designed to protect the organization from public backlash? Because the details, when you actually look at them, paint a picture that feels less like a fair race and more like a game with a predetermined winner. The first sign that something was deeply off came not from Gabriel's performance, but the behavior of the man at the very top of the depth chart. Deshaun Watson is not acting like a man who believes his job is secure, and that matters enormously. Because when a player with a $230 million guaranteed contract starts behaving with the anxiety of someone who can feel the floor giving way beneath him, it tells you something critical about the real internal dynamics of that locker room. Watson cut his summer short. While most veterans use the offseason to decompress, to recharge, to prepare mentally for the grind ahead, Watson came back to Cleveland early, and he didn't come back quietly. He arrived with a private team of performance specialists, personal trainers and physical therapists hand-picked by him, including well-known names in the athletic development world like Billy Voltitator and Quincy Avery. He bypassed the team's standard preparation protocols entirely and set up what amounted to his own private operation within the organization's walls. On the surface, you could frame that as dedication, as a superstar taking his preparation seriously, but the context tells a very different story. This is a man who is supposed to be the unquestioned franchise cornerstone, the guy the Browns mortgaged their entire future to acquire, the player around whom an entire rebuild was constructed. Men in that position don't typically feel the need to fly in their own security blanket of outside coaches just to keep pace with a rookie and a backup who isn't even getting first-team reps. They don't need to. Their position is understood. Their authority in the building is assumed. Watson's early return wasn't dedication, it was a signal that even he, the man with the most expensive contract in that facility, can feel the pressure building to levels that can no longer be ignored. One source described it bluntly. This wasn't just a workout, it was an act of desperation dressed up as professionalism. And when the highest-paid player in the room starts showing signs of desperation, the entire foundation of the quarterback competition shifts into something far more volatile and unpredictable than any coach, executive, or media analyst has been willing to publicly acknowledge. The question nobody's asking loudly enough is this: if Watson truly had nothing to worry about, why does it look like he's the one most afraid of what comes next? Then came the moment that genuinely ignited the entire debate into something that couldn't be contained or managed by the Browns' PR machine. ESPN's Phil Yates, one of the more credible voices covering this team, stepped into the conversation and dropped something that landed like a grenade in the middle of a very carefully constructed narrative. Yates publicly stated that Dillon Gabriel should not be dismissed, that if the Browns are genuinely serious about letting this competition play out the way they've been claiming publicly, Gabriel is a legitimate factor, not a placeholder, not a body warming a roster spot, a real, actual threat to the starting job, capable of making enough noise in training camp in the preseason to force his way into the conversation in a way the front office was clearly not expecting or particularly excited about. The reaction was immediate and ferocious. Cleveland fans, who have been conditioned to view this as a two-man race, didn't know whether to laugh or panic. Critics piled on Yates almost instantly, calling his take delusional, arguing that no front office with $230 million invested in one player and the marketing potential of a Sanders at quarterback would ever allow a third-round pick to actually take the job, regardless of performance. The criticism was loud and it was relentless. But here's the part that gets genuinely interesting when you slow down and actually think about it. If Gabriel is completely buried as the depth chart and the rep distribution suggest, why is a nationally prominent ESPN reporter going out of his way to keep Gabriel's name alive? Beat writers and analysts don't typically spend their credibility defending forgotten backup quarterbacks unless they're hearing something, unless there's a thread worth pulling, unless the people they talk to inside that building are suggesting that the situation is more fluid and more uncertain than the official public narrative allows. Yates didn't make that take in a vacuum, and the fact that it generated the kind of controversy it did suggests that somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, even among the loudest critics, there's a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, something is actually happening in Cleveland that the organization doesn't want the world to know about yet.
And that leads directly into one of the darkest and most deeply troubling theories circulating around the Browns facility right now. One that, if true, would represent something far more cynical than just a coaching staff playing favorites or a front office protecting its investment. The theory involves a deliberate, systematic reshaping of the offense itself, designed not to get the best football out of whoever is under center, but to make certain that one specific quarterback is set up to fail before the real competition even starts. Reports from multiple sources close to the team suggest that the offensive system being installed under new tactical influence is being quietly but unmistakably tilted in favor of Shedeur Sanders. The emphasis on mobility, the designed run elements, the RPO concepts, all of it fits Sanders' athletic profile in a way that leaves Gabriel's strength sitting in a corner collecting dust. Gabriel is a pocket passer. He reads defenses with patience and precision. He operates best in a structured, pro-style system that rewards intelligence and timing over athleticism. And from everything being reported out of Cleveland, that is not the offense being built. Now consider why that might be happening, and understand that this goes well beyond football. The prime effect is a documented, financially significant reality in modern professional sports. Having a Sanders under center, with the name recognition, the social media following, the built-in national audience, brings a commercial and media value to the Cleveland Browns that a Dillon Gabriel simply cannot replicate regardless of how well Gabriel plays. Jersey sales, television ratings, sponsorship activations, national coverage, all of it spikes dramatically with a marquee name at the most important position on the field. The Browns' front office is made up of business people as much as football people, and business people understand that sometimes the most important calculation isn't about wins and losses, it's about brand value. If the playbook is being written to showcase one man's skills while quietly making another man's strengths irrelevant, then Dillon Gabriel was never really in this competition at all. He was given a uniform, a locker, and a spot on the depth chart, but he was never actually given a chance. And if that's true, it is one of the most coldly calculated acts of career sabotage that the NFL has seen in years, hidden behind the comfortable language of open competition and letting the best man win. There is another dimension to this situation that almost nobody in the national media is discussing seriously, but that is sending genuine anxiety through the Browns organization at the highest levels. It involves not just who starts the season under center, but where those games are played, and it reveals just how uniquely terrifying the atmosphere in Cleveland has become for everyone involved in this quarterback situation. The Cleveland home crowd has a reputation that stretches back decades. These are passionate, deeply invested football fans who have endured more heartbreak than most fan bases ever experience in a lifetime. They are not patient, they are not forgiving, and they have a long, well-documented history of turning on their own players at the first sign of struggle, sometimes before the first quarter of a game is even finished. It is a stadium environment that can shift from thunderous support to absolute hostility faster than almost any other venue in the league. Now factor in the current reality. Watson, struggling to shake the ghosts of recent seasons and coming back from injury without a full offseason of team preparation. Sanders, a rookie carrying the weight of impossible expectations and playing in a stadium where the crowd will simultaneously love his ceiling and have zero tolerance for his floor. The internal belief among certain members of the coaching staff, and this is a belief that has been reportedly discussed seriously, not just whispered, is that Deshaun Watson may actually perform better on the road this season than in his own stadium. That the hostile energy of a Cleveland crowd waiting for him to fail, waiting for the moment they can start screaming for someone else, might be more damaging to his performance than any opposing defense he'll face. Think about what that actually means. It means there is a real possibility that lineup decisions for the Cleveland Browns in 2025 are made not based purely on who is playing the best football, but based on what the coaching staff fears the crowd will do if they don't make a change. 60,000 people in the stands, restless and impatient, waiting for one interception, one 3-and-out, one moment of hesitation from the starter, and suddenly Dillon Gabriel or Sanders sees the field, not because they earned it on the practice field, but because the organization is afraid of a fan revolt. It is home field disadvantage in its most extreme and psychologically complex form, and it might be the most honest window yet into just how fragile this entire situation actually is.
As the preseason schedule draws closer and the pressure inside the facility reaches levels that are becoming increasingly difficult to manage internally, there is a war happening over the identity of the offense itself that goes far deeper than anything being reported publicly. Todd Monken, tasked with building a system that can function effectively regardless of which quarterback ultimately wins the job, is attempting something that the NFL has historically punished teams for attempting. He is trying to construct a playbook that works for everyone. On paper, it sounds reasonable, adaptable, forward-thinking. In practice, it is an organizational nightmare. The game of football at the professional level is built on precision, repetition, and the kind of deeply ingrained muscle memory that comes from running the same concepts thousands of times until they become instinct. When your offensive system is being pulled in two completely different directions, mobile quarterback concepts on one side, traditional pocket passing structure on the other, the ripple effect goes all the way through the roster. Offensive linemen who don't know whether they're setting up a pocket or executing zone read blocking. Wide receivers who can't lock in their timing routes because the ball might come out at 3 different points in the progression depending on who's back there. Tight ends trying to figure out whether they're checkdown options or primary reads. This systemic confusion is exactly the kind of environment where a chess-playing, film room-obsessed quarterback like Dillon Gabriel could find an unexpected opening. A player who understands the whole offense, who has studied every position in every concept, who can identify the confusion in a defense before the snap and exploit it with precision. That player has value in chaos that goes unrecognized until the chaos fully arrives. But it is also precisely the kind of environment where Gabriel gets overlooked entirely, because the staff is too busy trying to manage the egos and the expectations of the bigger names to notice what the forgotten man is doing in the corner. It is a high-wire act, and the Browns coaching staff, already under enormous pressure from a fan base that has been promised results for years, may not survive the fall if they lose their balance. There is a ghost haunting this organization, and his name comes up in whispered conversations among fans and analysts who have been paying attention long enough to recognize a pattern when they see one repeating. That name is Ryan Grigson. For those who don't follow the deeper front office history, Grigson is one of the figures most frequently blamed for the circumstances surrounding Andrew Luck's stunning early retirement. One of the most talented quarterbacks of his generation, a player who by every measure should have had a decade more of elite football ahead of him, gone from the league before most fans could process what was happening. The central criticism of Grigson's operational philosophy, both then and now, is a consistent, almost ideological refusal to prioritize the offensive line. The men in the trenches, the ones who determine whether a quarterback has the time and space to operate, or whether he spends his entire season running for his life and absorbing punishment that shortens careers, has historically not been the focal point of Grigson's resource allocation. Instead, the attention and the resources flow toward the glamorous positions, the skill players, the quarterback competition that generates headlines and drives ticket sales. The offensive line, the unglamorous backbone of every successful offense in NFL history, gets managed rather than built. Now, Grigson is inside the Browns' front office, and fans who lived through the Luck situation are looking at the Cleveland quarterback room. 3 quarterbacks, enormous investment, enormous pressure, enormous public attention, and then looking at the offensive line protecting those quarterbacks, and they are deeply, visibly alarmed. Because the pattern looks familiar, because the priorities look identical, because history, when it decides to rhyme, tends to do it loudly. If the Browns' protection collapses, and there are genuine, credible concerns about whether it can hold up against NFL-level pass rushers, it will not matter which quarterback is standing behind it. Watson, Sanders, Gabriel, they all become targets in a shooting gallery. The sabotage, if that's even the right word, might not be strategic or intentional. It might simply be the inevitable consequence of an organizational philosophy that has already demonstrated its capacity to destroy a generational talent by refusing to protect him. And Dillon Gabriel, already buried on the depth chart, might ultimately be the luckiest of the three, kept away from the fire long enough that he escapes the burns that consume everyone else. Which brings everything to the final theory, the one that reframes this entire situation in a way that is simultaneously the most logical and the most brutal explanation for everything that has been happening in Cleveland. It is the theory that has been circulating among league insiders for weeks, spoken quietly enough that it hasn't fully broken through to the mainstream, but loudly enough among the people who actually understand how NFL front offices operate that it deserves to be taken seriously. The theory is this: Dillon Gabriel was never brought to Cleveland to compete for a starting job. He was brought here to be showcased, protected, and ultimately sold.
Multiple sources with knowledge of how quarterback-needy teams around the league are monitoring the Browns' training camp have suggested that Gabriel is being kept deliberately clean, minimal exposure to the chaos, limited contact with the dysfunction, carefully shielded from the internal mess, precisely because his value as a trade asset depends on him looking like an untouched commodity. Several franchises, reportedly including teams like the Giants and the Raiders, have front office personnel paying extremely close attention to every preseason snap Gabriel takes, evaluating him not as a Browns backup, but as a potential answer to their own quarterback problems. The math actually makes a disturbing kind of sense. The Browns cannot keep three quarterbacks of this caliber happy for an entire season. The cap implications, the locker room tension, the rep distribution problems, it all becomes unsustainable the moment the regular season starts and the depth chart has to harden into something real. And in that environment, the player with the least political protection, the one without the massive contract or the generational last name, is inevitably the one who gets moved. But moving Gabriel at the right moment, after he's had enough preseason exposure to look sharp and legitimate in front of a national audience, could return meaningful draft capital to a team that has been burning resources for years without results. It is, in the coldest possible reading of the situation, a betrayal. Gabriel came to Cleveland believing he had a genuine shot at something. The fans who have started paying attention to his story want to see him succeed there. But the NFL is not a league built on sentiment. It is a league built on leverage. And Dillon Gabriel right now might be the most useful piece of leverage the Browns have, not because of what he can do for them on the field this season, but because of what someone else will give them to have him in their building instead. Here's where everything lands. The depth chart in the NFL is never permanent. It is written in pencil, and it gets erased constantly by injuries, by blown leads, by locker room revolts, by the sheer unpredictability of a sport where everything can change in a single quarter on a random Sunday afternoon in October. Dillon Gabriel may be invisible right now. He may be buried beneath $230 million worth of contract, beneath the gravitational pull of a famous last name, beneath an organizational philosophy that may have decided his fate before training camp ever opened. But invisible doesn't mean finished, and buried doesn't mean gone. The variables stacking up around this situation are extraordinary. Watson's fragile psychological state under the weight of a hostile home crowd, Sanders' inevitable rookie growing pains in an offense that is still trying to figure out its own identity, an offensive line that may not be built to protect anyone at the level required, and front office carrying the ideological fingerprints of a man who has already watched one generational quarterback walk away because the protection simply wasn't there, and a national media voice keeping Gabriel's name alive for reasons that suggest something is happening behind the scenes that the public isn't being told. Trade interest from multiple teams watching him every move like hawks. Any one of those variables, if it breaks the wrong way, changes everything.
all of them breaking simultaneously creates the kind of organizational earthquake that reshapes a franchise for a decade. So the question you actually have to sit with going into this season is not whether Dillon Gabriel is good enough. The evidence suggests he is. The question is whether this machine, this chaotic, politically charged, financially compromised, ego-driven machine, will ever actually give him the moment he needs to prove it. Is he the break-glass emergency option the Browns will desperately reach for the moment everything falls apart? Is he the carefully packaged trade piece being prepared for shipment to a city that will actually let him play? Or is he something rarer and more difficult than either of those things? A genuinely talented player caught inside a system that was never designed to let him win, no matter what he does. The fuse on this situation has been lit. The countdown is running, and when it finally detonates, and it will detonate because situations this unstable always do, the fallout is going to reshape the Cleveland Browns in ways that nobody, inside or outside that facility, is truly prepared for. Dillon Gabriel may be the forgotten man today, but in the NFL, the forgotten men have a way of becoming exactly the people everyone wishes they hadn't forgotten. The throne is empty. The only question left is who's willing to take it.